Hello everyone, my name is Aniri Patel and I am working with Cedric Sen on a project called Climate Related Risk at Godrej Properties Limited, Mumbai. The aim of the project is to identify and assess climate related risk for real estate sector, aligning with CDP and TCFD framework. So CDP is Carbon Disclosure Project and TCFD is Task Force on Climate Related Financial Disclosure.
Hello everyone, I am Cedric. Neri and I are presenting the risks that arise from climate change for real estate companies, specifically Goldrich Property. The general context in brief is that today investors want companies to disclose climate change related impacts. So to fulfill this investor expectation, companies evaluate impacts from climate change into their financial disclosures. They also take mitigation measures against these risks and meanwhile report these climate disclosures to reporting agencies like CDP. And risk and opportunity assessment is part of this climate change disclosure. And we are presenting that for Goldrich Properties today.
Now, the agenda for today's presentation is that first we are discussing what type of risk companies are facing, and after that, we will discuss how TCFD and CDP framework worked, and with the help of these two framework, we derived a framework for GPL. Then we are discussing two main climate related risk, physical risk, and under that there are two major type of risk, chronic risk and acute risk. And after that we look into transactional risk, and which is talking about policy and legal, reputation, market and technology risk. So there are four risk universe for real estate sector. First, strategic risk, second, financial risk, then operational and compliance, and last, information technology risk. For this project, we are focusing on climate change related risk, and which is a part of strategic risk. Moving forward to discuss more about climate change related risk. As I mentioned in earlier slide, the first one is physical risk, and in that first is chronic risk. Chronic risk is talking about the gradual changes in weather conditions, and in that the unavailability of water, changes in climate pattern, rise in mean temperature and rise in mean sea level is the main four risk drivers of chronic risk. And on other side, the acute risk is talking about the natural catastrophe events. The second main risk is transactional risk under the climate change, and it is talking about policy and legal, and it's divided into two parts, current regulations and upcoming regulations, and then reputation risk, market risk and technology risk. If any developer are not taking any step towards physical risk and policy, then they need to face rest 3, reputation risk, market risk and technological risk in the future.
To understand the framework we just talked about, we studied and incorporated both TCFD and CDP frameworks. For those that are not familiar with these two, well, there are two prominent climate change risk disclosure frameworks that is established by Financial Stability Board, which is an intergovernmental organization, and CDP, which is a nonprofit organization. TCFD framework is designed to help companies calculate the financial impact of climate change risks. It puts climate-related risks and opportunities into a financial framework. This helps companies to quantify the risk and measure the risk. CDP framework, on the other hand, it focuses more on the disclosure aspect. It structures climate risk into a holistic risk management system so that it can know how companies evaluate the risks they are facing. It is also very interested in companies' management system for that and mitigation strategies against that. So we derived from both frameworks and came up with a hybrid model. And this structures climate change disclosure in a more holistic manner and satisfies both disclosure requirements. Well, please note that the financial impact of mitigations in our framework here have not been covered yet and can be passed on to the follow-up team of this project. We benchmark studied 9 companies about their climate change risk disclosure and performances. 5 of them are Indian companies, marked by yellow color here, and 4 of them are international companies, marked by blue color here. We found that companies that have good climate disclosure data and strong climate reporting scores are the 4 companies represented by large boxes on the left here. The letter grades here represent the latest climate disclosure scores they get from CDP, and they are Mahindra Life Spaces, Avalon Bay, City Development, and Swire Properties. And these are the 4 companies that we are taking a very close look at in this study.
Now we are discussing the chronic risk. The pie chart is showing that how many players talking about the specific risk driver under the chronic risk. And most of the developer considering unavailability of water, changes in climate pattern and rising mean temperature as a serious risk. Now we look into the type of risk in a detail. The first one is resource availability and efficiency under the chronic risk, and in that, the non availability of water and high dependency on a purchased water may lead to delay in project compliance and also may lead to delay in occupancy certificate. Also, the scarcity of water may lead into the low sales and cancellation of the booking. To mitigate this effect, first, no project should be identified in the water scarcity area or zone, and all the projects in near future should have reduce, reuse, recycle and recharge strategy. Also, focus on developing green infrastructure to recharge underground water and monitoring consumption through water meter box. Now, looking at changes in climate patterns. Due to the unexpected changes in climate and weather patterns, it is gonna disrupt transport network and also disrupt product delivery schedules, and this is gonna impact the disruption to supply delivery chain. The heat wave increase cooling demands and increase the fuel consumption, and the reason is that the market don't have running or supply electricity, and on other side the energy consumption is high in emissions. Also, there is an interesting correlation between worker and changes in perception weather patterns. The after and before the monsoon season in India, the seasonal workers go to their villages for harvesting, and it is difficult to get a steady flow of the laborers during that time. This labor shortage in the correlation of financial impact on the business, and it is difficult to compute and varies from site to site. To mitigate these consequences, developer can provide standardization of building materials and increase the vendors and procurement network and explore new technology for increased thermal insulations and develop labor retention schemes. Now, looking at the rising mean temperature, the extreme heat and rising temperature have an impact on productivity of labor at a site, and the increasing number of hot days impact on the contract workforce leads to health issues, and due to heat and exhaustion leading to absenteeism of workers and the several days of work loss. This leads to project delays and reduced revenue due to the delay in work. And as a result of delay in a planning approval such as occupancy certificate. To mitigate this risk, developer can provide training to laborers for handling heat exhaustions and restrict the working hours of laborers during hottest parts of the day, and provide shared resting space for laborers and providing comfortable shelter space to laborers. Also explore new technology to provide insulations and reduce heat island effect by reducing surface area exposure to heat. Now, looking at rising sea level, the global warming leads to rise in sea level, which in turn frequent flooding, the property and land reduction for real estate, and disrupting the sewer and stormwater flow, and also increase the property cost and increase insurance cost of the company. To mitigate this risk, conduct hydrological study and 100 years or 25 years flood data before closing up any deal agreement, and adopt rising sea level framework. In the adopting rising sea level framework, there are five main components. First is avoid, then accommodate, then protect, retreat, and attack. And this framework is established by Denmark countries. Now, moving forward to acute risk, the pie chart is showing that how many players talking about that specific risk under the acute risk. And most of the player considering disruption to construction and health related issues within the labor as a serious risk. Under the acute risk, such natural calamities impact the health related issues within laborers due to unhygienic conditions that arise due to such natural calamities. Also, the injuries or death of the labor happen on the site because of the natural calamities. The extreme weather, such as heavy rains and flooding, could result in disruption to construction activities at a project site and incurred the cost to repair or replace damaged or destroyed assets, and it impact on delaying in revenue. To mitigate these consequences, developers should prepare monsoon preparedness plan and spread awareness campaign for cleanliness within labors on a project site, and increase factor of safety in high seismic zone, and prepare climate resilience plan and safety precautions and emergency medical response team, and lastly revised standard operating procedure to mitigate this risk.
I will cover the transitional risks from climate change. They include policy and legal risk, reputation risk, market risk, and technology-related risk. In other words, I will explain how climate change influences these four risk types. We think climate change influences policy and legal risk in three ways. First is the legal risk from litigation claims. It means that legal claims by external agencies will lead to financial and reputational damage. To mitigate against that, we suggest to closely monitor litigation claims that is associated with water demand, energy source, building structure quality, and biodiversity. And we suggest to strengthen the review and monitoring system to ensure these claims and incidences are resolved properly. The second policy and legal risk driver is non-compliance with current regulations. It can result in fines due to non-compliance of regulations or withdrawal of tax benefits when regulations change. To mitigate, we suggest to strengthen monitoring and review system to make sure buildings locally meet local and national regulations. For example, non-compliance to non-objection certificate would lead to higher operating cost because non-objection certificate is needed in withdrawing groundwater at construction sites in India. And the third policy and legal risk driver is impact from future regulations. We expect that ESG regulations in India will change to meet India's intended national determined contribution, and sustainable development goal targets. Um, a good past example would be the recent Energy Star rating home mandate in India and hike in water tariff and stricter building standards. We expect that in the future, um, regulations on greenhouse gas emissions will come, either in the form of carbon pricing, like carbon tax, or in the form of carbon trading scheme. Um, for carbon pricing and carbon tax would be something like what Singapore did. They charge $5 per ton of greenhouse gas emissions on companies. And for carbon trading scheme would be something like what China did, which are set to be implemented in 2020. Then we looked at the reputation risks from climate change. The first is not fulfilling commitments to stakeholders. This means that if the company fails to deliver committed green goals and targets, it will damage its reputation. We suggest ESG goals should be published both internally and externally to and to robust review system on ESG commitments and take required financial actions. The second is stakeholder concern and negative feedback. It means negative feedback from central, state, and local governments. We suggest to support green projects and targets that benefit communities, and also to proactively follow ESG managing partners' agendas and meet their disclosure requirements, and to align the top management on climate level disclosures. The third is disclosure expectations from rating agencies. It means failing to meet disclosure expectations can lead to financial and reputation setbacks. We suggest to support and review ESG team on disclosure outcomes. The final reputation risk is shifts in consumer preference. This means a fail to meet changing customer expectations. Um, this would damage companies' reputation. We suggest to establish robust tracking on fulfillment of commitment under green building certification and to communicate to customers about the benefits of green building. Moving on to the market risk. The first driver is preference for more efficient buildings from customers because simply put, energy efficient buildings saves money for customers, right? To mitigate, we suggest to increase design and development of energy efficient units. The second risk is consumer preference to sustainable products. Specifically, it means loss of consumer and brand value because of missing building certificates and standards. To mitigate, we suggest to increase use of sustainable materials and methods in building designs. And the third driver of market risk, which we think is a very important one, is access to capital. It means the possibility and benefits that a sustainable constructions bring to green loans and green bonds. If competitors utilizes these better, it would result in their easier access to capital, and that definitely disadvantages the company. We suggest to utilize them and track competitors' performances in utilizing these. A good example here is how city development uses green loans and green bonds to fund their projects. They launched the first green bond in Singapore in 2017, and the $100 million green bond was taken up by investors within a day. Then in 2019, they issued green loans totaling 500 million together with DBS Bank and HSBC Bank, green bonds are attracting green pledge bonds, um, like UN Principle for Responsible Investment signatories, which has amassed over 1,500 signatories. They represent 60 trillion in US dollars in assets. And another driver for market risk is competitiveness. It means that not maintaining robust resiliency against climate change would reduce companies' competitiveness. And on the other hand, having that resiliency would give company a competitive advantage against others. We suggest a robust tracking on fulfillment of required green building certificates and support research and studies on climate-related trends to know them first-handedly. And we suggest to track for performances of leading competitors as well. The last part of transitional risk is about technology. So first of all, cost of construction might increase when implementing low carbon technologies, especially when these technologies are still at the very early stage. So we suggest a robust tracking on the performance and cost of newly adopted low carbon technologies. And secondly, it is non-acceptance by customers and project teams. This means that some low carbon building technology might find it very difficult for customers to adopt. And for that, we suggest to actively communicate to customers about their concerns about new sustainable designs. And the third risk driver is competitors' adoption of energy efficient technology, because energy efficient technology saves operating costs, and slower adoption than competitors can lead to higher cost than competitors. To mitigate against that, we suggest to actively monitor and participate in the development of energy efficient technologies and to track competitors' adoption of energy efficient technology. So what are the takeaways? Well, we conclude first of all, there is a need to formally analyze and address these risks. And the best way to do so is to synthesize both TCFD and CDP frameworks. In general, the real estate industry faces serious physical and transitional risks from climate change, as buildings contribute nearly 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and 11% of that is due to building materials and construction. Incorporating resilient design strategies into office building and workplace design can have a very big impact. And GPL, in the middle of this global concern, can be very proactive in mitigating these risks and harness the opportunities that also comes with them.